Welcome to this Principles of Macroeconomics course. We are about to get into topic 8. So let's begin. Let's go back to the main page of our course. And maybe I'll turn the editing button off so that it looks more like what you see when you enter it. And so we're going to go to the lecture topics and click on exam 1 and open it up in a new tab. And I've already done that. It's right here. And so topic 8 is demand. Define the law of demand and draw a demand curve labeling the axes correctly and the curve correctly. And then list the ceteris paribus variables that affect demand and illustrate a shift in a demand curve. Now discuss how a change in each of the variables would lead to the shift you have illustrated in your drawing. All right. So we do need to open up the PowerPoint for this topic. Let's do that. And I was just noticing topic 7. We'll come back and take a look at that in a moment, because topic 7 leads right into topic 8. So here we are on topic 8, and we'll open this up in a new tab, and actually it just opens up in my Microsoft PowerPoint viewer, which is right here. And so as I was promising you, we want to take a look back at topic 7, and I can do it from here. So that's the lecture notes. Which one did I want? This one here. Let's open that up in a new tab. So topic 7 was about the circular flow of economic activity for capitalistic market system, simplified greatly with no government here. This is a completely laissez-faire economic system. And in topic 7, we use this to explain how markets can determine what to produce, how to produce it, and to whom to distribute the products without any direction from the central government, just through the workings of supply and demand in these markets. So basically, topic 8 follows because we're going to be taking a look at the demand curve here in this market. And then when we turn to topic 9, we will be taking a look at the supply curve in the market. In topic 10, we'll take a look at equilibrium, how equilibrium is established by the interplay of supply and demand. And what is it? There's 8, 9, 10, 11 talks about disequilibrium and how what happens when some markets are permanently in disequilibrium. We'll even talk about whether that actually can be the case. But anyway, so topic 8, topic 9, 10, and 11 all follow directly from topic 7, which followed in a sort of circuitous route from our discussion of the production possibilities frontier. All right, let's get back to the PowerPoint. Here we go. And so basically, demand itself, this is not the law of demand, is the willingness and ability of buyers to purchase different quantities of a good. So basically, we have here, if I can get my drawing pad in place, 2 of these variables right here will turn out to be some of the variables will hold constant in the law of demand, and willingness will be like preferences and ability, income. So the willingness and ability of buyers to purchase different quantities of a good at different prices during a specific period of time. I'm not sure why that colon is there. Let's remove it. All right. So the law of demand then just relates two variables, the quantity demanded of a good and its price. So as the price of a good rises, the quantity demanded of a good falls, and as the price of a good falls, the quantity demanded of a good rises, ceteris paribus. So we'll be talking later on what we mean by price, relative versus absolute. We'll talk about quantity demanded versus demand, and we'll talk about what ceteris paribus means. But basically, you can see the law of demand states that the price of a good and the quantity demanded of the good are inversely related. And just to put both a price increase and a price decrease in here, we can see that they are inversely. They move in the opposite direction. So here's a representative graph of the law of demand. And basically, we put the price of the good right here on the vertical axis and the quantity demanded of the good on the horizontal axis. And, I guess I should say, even if we drew this the other way around with price down here and quantity here, it would be inversely related. And the reason I talk about that is that I'm sure in your algebra classes or math classes, where basically usually x is put on the horizontal axis and y on the vertical axis, and you would have an inverse functional relationship between x and y, where y is a function of x. Oddly enough, and it's just because this is how the first demand and supply curves were drawn by Alfred Marshall back in 1890, economists reversed this. The quantity demanded is the dependent variable in this graph, and the price is the independent variable. It doesn't really matter, but just in case you get confused about that, that's what's going on. So as the price falls from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1, the quantity demanded increases. Price falling will lead to quantity demanded increasing. And as the price increases from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, so price would be rising. That would imply quantity demanded would be falling. Okay? I have an arrow there. And there you have the law of demand. Pretty simple. In microeconomics, we go into great detail of why we think this is reasonable to expect. So ceteris paribus, let's talk about that. It just means all other things constant, or nothing else changes except for the price. So it is an assumption used to explain the effect of a change in one influencer variable on the outcome while holding all other influences and variables. So the outcome would be quantity demanded the effect would be a change in price. We're holding all other things that might change quantity demanded constant, okay? So a demand schedule is just a table showing the relationship between prices and quantities demanded. And we'll take a look at the schedule. So here is the schedule in part A, and then part A is graphed into this graph right here. And this is the same graph, demand curve graph that we saw before. Oh, by the way, this sometimes confuses people too. Economists call this demand curve a curve. Many students, when they take this, say, well, that's a straight line. It's not a curve. Well, as with mathematicians, we're going to classify a straight line as to be in a set of all curves, okay? It's just a unique type of curve, okay? It's a straight line. So, yeah, so when I talk about the demand curve, or the textbook does, it could be this straight line. There's going to be many other things in this chapter where you're going to have to get used to the jargon of economists, okay? So let's go to prices, and now we're going to make a big point about this. The absolute price is what we usually think in terms of. For example, maybe a quart of milk costs $1.50. That's an absolute money terms. But the relative price, that is the opportunity cost, is the price of a good in terms of another good, or all other goods, really. And the law of demand is really stated with this in mind. In other words, when you go in to buy a quart of milk, or like I'm doing now, I'm looking to help my son out to have an old deck he dismantled and all the debris from it carried away. So when we get bids on a hauler to carry that away, we're going to be conscious of all other prices, like the price of a quart of milk, a gallon of gasoline, our mortgage, the cost of a new car, cost of replacing a window. So we have all these other prices in mind, and that's how we know whether the quote we're going to get up from the hauler is expensive or inexpensive. What the opportunity cost, what we'll have to forego in purchasing by paying someone to haul this debris off. So for economists, the demand curve is always in terms of relative prices. So if the relative price or opportunity cost rises, everything else unchanged, the quantity demanded will decrease. So absolute money prices, the problem here is that, say you have inflation and prices double for a good. But let's just say that all other prices also double. So what you would find is that the quantity demanded hasn't changed at all when the absolute price has doubled. And the reason for that is that the opportunity cost, that is, all other prices have increased. So, hey, this course, we're going to be talking about measuring the average change in price levels. And that's going to come up pretty quickly. I think, where is that? I think it's right after all of these questions. I think 12 and 13, topics 12 and 13, we'll talk about, taking a look at the change in these absolute prices, okay? And by taking a look at a change in absolute prices on average, we can then tell whether relative prices have changed or not. And I usually have a couple examples. For example, college tuition. I can give you the college tuition I paid when I was a freshman, and we can take a look at the University of Texas, that is, and we can take a look at what the University of Texas charges for one semester now. And obviously, the absolute price would have changed, but has the relative price changed? As it turns out, it has, but not as much as the absolute price has changed. If I remember when we get there, I'll try to come back and underline this idea, okay? So basically, if you keep in mind that when we talk about the law of demand, we're talking about the opportunity cost, okay? Here's another one of these terms, pieces of jargon that economists use: change in demand and change in quantity demanded. So if any, let me get a different color here. So if any of the variables other than price change, then we say that the demand curve shifts to a new position and we have a change in demand. For example, very quickly, when we get to a list of those variables, we'll list quantity demanded along this axis, and I'm going to say price per unit on this axis. So we have demand curve 1. And let's say that we've been holding income constant. Now we let income rise. Well, that will shift the demand curve to a new position. And this is called a change in demand, but not a change in quantity demanded. And I admit this is difficult to understand why economists do this, because obviously there's going to be change in quantity demanded too, not only a change in where the demand curve is situated. But that is just the jargon economists use when they're referring to demand curves, okay? Let me think. Should I go into any further detail on this? Let's see what the next one is. Now, let's continue on this for a while. So here's an increase in demand. So in other words, we have the demand schedule A, and we see the quantity demanded at each of these different prices. And then we go to demand schedule B, and we see the quantity demanded has changed. The quantity is increased for each and every price. So we have a shift to the right. And I might add here's another one of these things you're going to have to memorize. Economists, including myself in the textbook, will always talk about an increase in demand as being a shift to the right. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to put a big X here, not a shift up. All right. So not up, even though up would work fine here, but a shift to the right. And then they will talk about a decrease being a shift to the left. And not down. And the reason for this is not the demand curve, but the supply curve. And if I can just draw a supply curve very quickly in here. Oh, good, I can draw the margin here. So we have the price per unit, and now we'll draw the quantity supplied, and the supply curve will slope upward and to the right. Let's call this supply 1. And now there's an increase in supply 2. And so at any given price, let's just say price A, the quantity supplied at A obviously is increased, but that's, and I'll call this prime if I can, but that's only because the supply curve has shifted to the right. This is an increase, but here's then the reason why we don't say up and down, because this is down, and people will think, that's a decrease because it's down. And great confusion results from this from introductory students when they're given supply and demand curves on exams, and they're told that the supply curve has increased. What they're likely to do, the supply curve has increased, is draw the supply curve here, because that is an upward shift in the supply curve, and isn't that an increase? Well, if indeed they're looking for an equilibrium price, let's say this is a demand curve, they're going to think the equilibrium price is up here, whereas it's really down here. And so big errors can be made if you start thinking in up and down with the supply and demand curves. It's better to always think in terms of an increase being a shift to the right in both demand and supply, and a decrease being a shift to the left. All right? Very important sort of caution here. All right, and here is a decrease in demand. And so now we're back to a change in demand, a change in quantity demanded. So if only the price changes, and the other variables that affect demand remain unchanged, then there is a movement along the demand curve, not a change in the demand curve. So there is a change in quantity demanded, not in demand. So basically, if we draw a demand curve here, quantity demanded, price per unit, and we have a demand curve here, let's call it 1, and the price goes from P1 to P sub 2. This would be the quantity demanded at price 1. Maybe that would be that at P1. And this is the quantity demanded at P2, okay? So if the price changes and nothing else changes, what's going to happen is that we're going to have a movement along the demand curve, but no change in the demand position of the demand curve itself. This is very confusing too. Demand will not have changed at all. Whoops. All right. So it's an interesting point. Now I guess from this I'll talk about the confusing part of this change in quantity demanded versus change in demand, because here are all the variables economists posit as influencing the quantity demanded of a good. It depends on the following variables. Price, and this is the one we define the law of demand in. Then here are all the variables that we're holding constant, the ceteris paribus variables, the prices of other goods, substitute goods, complementary goods, also then the taste and preferences, willingness, which I had spoken of before, income, ability, number of buyers in the market or population, and the expectations of future prices or availability, even we could say, of the good. These are the other variables we're holding constant. Only if the price changes do we have a movement along the demand curve. If any of these other variables change, we're going to shift the demand curve to the left or to the right, okay? Let's take a look at, I'm not sure I should do this, but why not? If we go to the home, let's put in a new slide. I wonder if I can do this. So if we go to this slide, I don't know to what degree I need to go here because I don't know, what sort of math levels you're at, but I'm sure I'm going to say, I'm going to assume you've had algebra where, and I've already talked a bit about algebra, where you can have y as a dependent variable and is a function of x, right? And I don't know, maybe you could say that y equals 2x plus 3, the sort of the slope intercept type of thing. And if you put y here and x here, 0 here, let's say 3 is here. So when x is 0, y is 3, then this will, we would draw the line up like this. So basically, if we go back to the previous one, what we can sort of say is, if you want to think of quantity demanded being y, the price of the good, that's x1, but we have other variables that can influence y. We have x2, and I could have said x2 and x3, but I'll leave that alone. X3, x4, x5 sub 5, and x sub 6, right? So then if we come back here, we could say, okay, quantity demanded of, oops, I want this to be a good, say y, is a function of the price of the good, other prices, and I forget the list, taste and preferences, income, the number of people in the market, the population, and expectations. So it's a function of all of these variables. And the only thing I wanted to point out is, obviously, let's say this one, which is, I believe, preferences. If it changed, obviously it would change the quantity demanded. So in a strict mathematical sense, any change of any one of these variables is going to change quantity demanded. So it's odd, I think, and I think you're thinking that economists would say, no, that's a change in demand, not a change in quantity demanded. But what explains this is that economists are actually not thinking of this mathematical equation. They're thinking of this graph of the law of demand. Okay, quantity of good, y, let's say, okay? And basically the law of demand is like this, slopes downward and to the right. So all of these other variables, in other words, the only variables shown maybe if I go in red, are this variable and this variable, okay, the quantity demanded. So all of these other variables are not on the graph. So the only way we can show what happens when those variables change, if we're still going to be using this graph, is to, that's supposed to be a D, to shift the demand curve. And this would be an increase in demand, but we can also shift it left, be a decrease. So any one of these variables could increase or decrease the demand, so that they would, if they change, the demand changes. If price changes, well then quantity demand changes. And, kind of one of those things. And really, it's mostly here in principles of economics where this is confusing. In intermediate levels and graduate levels, everything is in terms of actual mathematical equations, so it doesn't matter. Probably also in business magazines and newspapers, they'd probably make this distinction too, in addition to principles courses. All right, let's take a look at price variable change. And if the price variable changes while all other variables remain unchanged, then there'll be a movement along the demand curve, which we have already talked about. And let's go to the next one. So price change only. If the price change is from $3 to $1, quantity demanded goes from 20 to 40. There's a movement along the demand curve from this point. What does it drop to? $1 here. So there's a movement along the demand curve. The demand curve itself remains exactly as it is. There's no change in demand. That can also be confusing. There is no change in demand. Okay, so these are the shift variables, the ceteris paribus variables, prices of other goods, substitute goods, complementary goods. I don't know. Let's see how we can do this here. Let's say the price of the substitute good goes up, and that will mean that the quantity demanded of the good we're interested in will also increase, because people who had been buying this will stop buying as much and start buying more of this. On the other hand, if the price of a substitute goes down, that will imply that the quantity demanded of the good under question will go down. Whereas here with complementary goods, this is shift to the right, and this is a shift to the left of the demand curve we're interested in. So if the price of a complementary good goes up, and a complementary good is a good that is used with a good like gasoline and automobiles, maybe paper and printers, computers and software, cereal and milk, bread and butter. So the idea, tennis balls and tennis rackets, I think that may be an example in the textbook if I remember. So if the price goes up, then what's going to happen to the quantity demanded of the complement is it's going to go down, and vice versa. If the price of the complement goes down, it should have a positive impact on the quantity demanded of the goods. So this would cause a leftward shift in the demand curve, and this would cause a rightward shift. Taste and preferences, and this is what marketing is all about, and advertising is trying to get people to change their willingness. So basically, if you can get people to think something is cool or beneficial, this will shift, let's say, taste and preferences plus. In other words, positive change that will shift the quantity demanded up, and this is a rightward shift, and obviously the opposite is different. Income, usually, and I'm going to represent income. This is another one of those little things you're going to have to get used to. I'm not sure if the textbook does this, but almost all economics does. They use Y to represent income. And the reason for that is capital I usually means investment goods, and these mean purchasing capital goods. And sometimes a lowercase I represents interest rates, so sometimes R is used for that. So to avoid confusion, economists usually use the uppercase Y to represent income. So if income goes up, typically, and we're going to talk about this, for a normal good, that would mean obviously quantity demanded would increase, but this, we're really saying this causes a shift. In other words, this would be a rightward shift in the demand curve. Whereas if income goes down, everything else being the same, obviously quantity demanded of any good, normal good, will decrease, and this will be a leftward shift, okay, for a normal good. Now we will talk about goods that aren't normal, like inferior goods, okay? So, yeah, we get into this much more detail in micro. And obviously the number of buyers, if population goes up, more people will be wanting and participating in the market. So quantity demanded increases. This would be a rightward shift, population down. Expectations of future prices or availability. So if expectations are the prices, how can I put this? Future prices are going to go up, everything else the same. This will lead you to buy more right now before they go up and shift it to the right, right? This is confusing because people say, oh, the prices are going up. Why are people buying more? Well, they're buying more because of the prices haven't gone up yet. They're going to go up in the future. At least that's what they expect. And if people expect future prices to go down, well, they'll wait to buy it until they go down. So the quantity demanded right now will decrease, and this will be a shift to the left. Hey, I think we worked through all of those. And now as we work through the rest of these, they talk about substitutes here, at least this slide does, that I put here. And they talk about complements, and we talk about the effect on demand of if price increase on a substitute good and on a complementary good. And we talk about taste and preferences here, I believe, and put it in terms of what happens. Why does the price of one more day at Disney World cost less than the price of the first day? And this is part of microeconomic theory. It's because of diminishing marginal utility that the first day adds more utility than the second day. To get you to buy the second day, they need to come down on price. Factors causing a shift in the demand curve, income in here, where they call normal good, inferior good, neutral good. Um, good of the demand for which does not change as income rises or falls. Inferior good, a good the demand for which falls or rises as income falls and rises. So, in a typical example would be ramen noodles for college students who are on a budget and trying to save money. They often buy ramen noodles, which are very cheap, yet somewhat filling. So while they're poor and in college, there's a lot of ramen noodles purchased. When college students get out of college, and hopefully with the degree with which employers are willing to hire you, and hence your income goes up, you'll start buying more meat and other things and less uh, and fewer packages of ramen noodles. So as your income goes up, the quantity demanded of ramen noodles falls. This is an inferior good, only in the sense of that's what's happening with quantity demanded relative to income. Number of buyers, pretty straightforward. Um, and here's the population. So the market demand curve, we just add up the demand of different people in the market. So the more people you add, the more the quantity will be. And if you subtract people from the market, the less it will be. Here you can see we're adding up all the different demand curves of each individual buyer. So the more individuals you add, the more this demand curve will shift outward. So if we add more other buyers, the demand curve will shift outward. Okay. Let's see what we have here. Expected future prices, and here we talk about what happens about to the quantity demanded as expectations change. And really, you could use the most recent example, and there are other goods too, with like mask during the COVID-19 pandemic, or toilet paper right at the beginning of it. People thought, price of toilet paper would go up, and because people had rushed to get it, and the prices of toilet paper would rise. So better rush out and get yours now before the price rises. And what happens is they create a shortage. Um, it's interesting, and this is something we can talk about. Most stores didn't raise the price, even though it would be rational to do so and would have helped allocate the resources, toilet paper, to the people who need it most if they had raised prices. But they knew that if they raised prices temporarily, then many consumers and consumer advocates and politicians would get very angry and threaten to damage the firms. So the firms are, in a sense, quaking in their boots, and they don't want to get this bad blowback for doing something that would be completely rational. Instead, they let the people who bought a garage full of toilet paper, and I saw some of this on the news, sell it through, I guess, Craigslist or other means at a much higher price. Um, this happens, it seems like it, all the time. Anyway, that concludes the lecture over this topic, and we are going to go on to topic 9 on supply, the very next topic. See you there.